At my own engagement party, my mother grabbed my younger sister's arm and pulled her close. While she is greeting the guests, go through her phone. Copy every text from that man, she whispered. My sister Jessica did not hesitate. She plucked my phone off the gift table, dropped it into her silver purse, and walked straight to the restroom. I stood frozen by the floral arrangements. My chest tightened. I could hear the faint jazz music playing in the background, but the upscale restaurant felt silent. 15 minutes passed. Jessica finally emerged from the hallway. She looked sick. Her face was the color of ash. She leaned into my mother and muttered, "Mom." Her phone. Before we uncover what Jessica found on my device, welcome to Grape Vengeance. Please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know your age and what state you are watching from today. Let us return to the story. My name is Olivia Smith. I am 31 years old. I live in Georgia. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of my upcoming wedding to David. David stood across the crowded room laughing with his uncles. He is a forensic accountant. His job is tracking down hidden money and finding financial discrepancies. My mother, Patricia, always despised him. She called him boring. She said he asked too many questions. Now, watching her panic, I realized her hatred had nothing to do with his personality. I did not confront them right away. I stayed back, sipping my sparkling water. The liquid tasted bitter. I watched Patricia snatch the phone from Jessica. My mother always carried herself with perfect posture, wearing expensive silk and a practiced smile. In that moment, her polished armor cracked. Her eyes darted toward the exit. Her breathing grew shallow. I walked over, letting my heels tap against the polished hardwood. "Everything all right?" I asked. I reached out my hand. "I want to get a picture of David with his parents." Patricia thrust the phone into my palm. Her fingers were cold. She refused to look at my face. "I have a splitting headache," Patricia declared. Her voice was sharp, loud enough for David's family to hear. "Jessica, grab the coats. We are leaving right now." Jessica kept her head down. She practically ran toward the front door. Patricia followed, leaving a trail of heavy floral perfume in her wake. They did not say goodbye. They did not congratulate me. They just fled. The engagement toast was ruined. David's mother gave a confused wave. David walked over, placing a warm hand on my lower back. He asked what happened. I could not answer him yet. I just stared at the screen of my phone. My mother wanted to read my private conversations. She thought she was staying one step ahead. Instead, she just handed me the key to a door she spent over a decade keeping locked. The heavy oak door of the restaurant swung shut, cutting off my mother and sister from the party. They left a quiet, uncomfortable vacuum in their wake. David stood beside me, his hand resting warm against my spine. Across the room, his mother Susan lowered her champagne glass. She exchanged a confused glance with her husband. Susan had spent weeks helping me plan this dinner. She arranged the floral centerpieces, she coordinated the menu, she treated me with a warmth my own mother never possessed. Now Susan stood near the head table, her face falling as the reality of my family's sudden departure set in. I forced a smile, though my jaw ached from the effort. I stepped forward to address the remaining guests. My voice sounded thin, even to my own ears. "Please do not let this interrupt the evening," I told the room. "My mother just felt unwell. Let us keep celebrating." Susan nodded politely, but the damage was done. The air in the private dining room felt heavy, tainted by Patricia's calculated exit. David's uncle tried to save the moment by clinking his fork against a glass, initiating a toast. He spoke about love building a strong foundation and supporting each other through difficult times. I appreciated the sentiment, but I barely registered his words. Patricia had won again. She always knew exactly how to extract the oxygen from my happiest moments. I stood there in my white dress, feeling like a foolish child instead of a grown woman preparing for marriage. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced laughter and polite evasion. Every time a guest asked where my family went, I felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over me. An hour later, David and I walked to his car in the damp Georgia evening. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. David unlocked the doors and the headlights flashed, cutting through the dark. He did not press me for answers right away. He possessed the quiet, analytical patience. It made him an excellent forensic accountant, and it made him a steady partner. Once he started the engine, he looked across the center console. "You have been holding that phone like it might burn you," he noted. "Do you want to talk about one back there?" I stared down at the black screen. My mother ordered Jessica to go through my phone, I said. The words tasted metallic in my mouth. She took it to the restroom. Then they practically ran out of the building. David merged onto the highway. The dashboard lights illuminated his frown. Why would Patricia want to read your messages? We both know she disapproves of me, but stealing your device is a bold move even for her. I do not know, I murmured. I tapped the screen to wake it up. My parents had always treated my financial independence as a personal insult. When I moved out at 18, Patricia told me I would fail. When I paid off my first car, my father told me I overpaid. They constantly belittled my choices while flaunting their own wealth. Now, thinking about Patricia's trembling hands in the restaurant, I realized her arrogance was just a mask for terror. She was afraid of something hidden on this device. My hands shook as I unlocked the screen. I opened my text messages first. I scrolled through my recent conversations with David. Nothing seemed out of place. We mostly discussed wedding catering, venue deposits, and mundane updates about our workdays. There was zero reason for my mother to care about any of it. I backed out of the text thread and opened my email application. I knew my sister. Jessica spent her entire life seeking our mother's approval. She never questioned an order, no matter how cruel. If Patricia told her to dig through my purse, Jessica would do it without a second thought. But Jessica was also careless. She always forgot to cover her tracks. I checked my inbox. Nothing unread. I tapped the sent folder. It was empty for the day. My pulse quickened. I pressed the trash icon. A single deleted thread sat at the very top of the screen. The timestamp showed it was moved to the trash exactly 20 minutes ago, right when Jessica was hiding in the restaurant restroom. The recipient listed on the forwarded message was Patricia's personal email address. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on the recovered thread. The original sender was not a wedding vendor or a family member. The email came from a junior analyst at David's accounting firm. The subject line read, "Preliminary Findings, Georgia Real Estate Holdings." I squinted at the glowing screen. The text of the email was brief, referencing an attached PDF document containing tax records and corporate registration forms. "David," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "why is someone from your office sending me documents about real estate holdings?" David glanced at me, then brought his attention back to the road. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I asked my team to run a quiet check," he explained. "When we applied for our mortgage pre-approval last week, the bank flagged something strange on your credit report. It showed a strange discrepancy between your reported income and your supposed asset history. I did not want to worry you until I knew more, so I had an analyst pull the public records. I forwarded the results to your email this afternoon so we could discuss it over the weekend." My mind raced. I worked a demanding corporate job in downtown Atlanta. I earned a decent salary, but I paid my own rent, my own car note, and my own student loans. My parents lived in a sprawling estate and spent their weekends at a private country club. They never offered to pay for my college. They never offered to help with my rent. I had zero assets to my name. Or so I thought. I tapped the PDF attachment in the recovered email. A white screen with a spinning gray circle mocked my impatience. Finally, the pages rendered. It was a dense 50-page file, filled with legal jargon, state tax stamps, and corporate registration codes. I scrolled past the cover page, my thumb dragging across the glass. The first section outlined the formation of a limited liability company registered in the state of Georgia over 12 years ago. 12 years ago, I was just 19, working double shifts at a campus coffee shop to pay for my textbooks. I read the property addresses listed under the company umbrella. A commercial warehouse in Marietta, a retail strip mall in Alpharetta, a large parcel of undeveloped land just outside the city perimeter. The estimated value of these holdings was staggering. My mother did not hate David because he was boring. She did not hate him because he asked too many questions at family dinners. She hated him because his profession was tracking down hidden money. Patricia realized she was losing her grip on me. By marrying a financial investigator, I was bringing a spotlight into the dark corners of our family dynamics. She ordered Jessica to steal my phone because she needed to know exactly how close David was getting to her secrets. I kept scrolling through the PDF, my eyes scanning the dense paragraphs. I reached the section labeled Primary Stakeholders. The interior of the car felt suddenly freezing. I reread the line 3 times, certain my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark. The state registration forms required the names of the individuals holding the majority shares of this shell company. There were no corporate aliases. There were no hidden offshore accounts. Listed right there in plain black ink as the primary shareholder and legal owner of the entire commercial real estate portfolio was Olivia Smith. My name, my social security number. I dropped the phone into my lap. The screen cast a pale glow across my dress. David pulled the car into the driveway of my apartment complex. He shifted into park and turned to look at me, concern etching deep lines into his forehead. "Olivia," he said softly, "what did you find?" I picked the phone back up and turned the screen toward him. My parents did not just ruin my engagement toast, they had stolen my identity. Morning light spilled across my kitchen counter, illuminating 2 untouched mugs of coffee. I had not slept a single minute. My mind spun in dark, chaotic circles, analyzing every interaction I ever had with my parents. I sat opposite David at the small wooden table I bought at a thrift store 5 years ago. He had his silver work laptop open. The screen cast a harsh glare on his tired face. I picked up my phone and dialed my manager. I forced my voice to sound raspy, claiming a sudden flu. David sent a brief email to his firm requesting a personal day. We were not going to the office. We needed to dismantle the lie my family built around my life. David turned his monitor toward me. He pulled up the encrypted file the junior analyst forwarded yesterday. Before we dive into the corporate structures you need to understand how we found this, David explained. His tone was gentle but firm, operating in full investigator mode. He opened a separate tab showing our recent joint mortgage pre-approval application. We submitted the paperwork 3 weeks ago, hoping to buy a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. When the bank ran your credit profile, the automated system flagged a severe debt-to-income anomaly, David said. He pointed to a highlighted row of numbers. You reported a standard corporate salary, but the credit bureaus showed you possessing an open line of commercial credit tied to a real estate holding firm. The algorithms assumed you were either laundering money or hiding a secondary income stream. The loan officer almost denied our application on the spot. I stared at the numbers. They blurred together. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I thought back to my early 20s. I remembered sitting on the floor of a studio apartment with no heat, eating cheap noodles, trying to figure out how to afford my college textbooks. I remembered calling my father Richard, asking for a small loan to fix my broken car transmission so I could get to my waitress job. He told me character was built through financial struggle. He said handouts would ruin my work ethic. He delivered that lecture while standing on the deck of his private boat. They watched me struggle. They praised my independence in public while letting me drown in debt in private. All while they used my name to build a commercial empire. David clicked a few keys, bringing up the state registry documents. "Let us trace the assets," he murmured. The holding company was incorporated 12 years ago. Patricia and Richard listed themselves as managing directors. That designation gave them operational control over the bank accounts and property acquisitions. But they listed you as the primary shareholder. Why? I asked. My voice sounded hollow. Why would they put the assets in my name instead of their own? Tax evasion and liability protection, David answered instantly. Your father runs a lucrative private investment firm. If his business ever faced a lawsuit or federal audit, his personal wealth would be seized. By placing these commercial properties under your social security number, he shielded his wealth from the government. You were the perfect dummy corporation, a college student with no financial literacy and a clean record. David pulled up the property deeds. I read the addresses out loud. A sprawling retail complex in downtown Atlanta, a block of high-end office spaces in Buckhead, a luxury apartment building under construction near the river. They bought all of this using my identity, I whispered. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with sickening clarity. I remembered every family dinner over the past 2 years. Patricia always interrogated David about his career. She asked pointed, invasive questions about how forensic accountants trace hidden assets. She wanted to know what software his firm used. She wanted to know how far back the federal government could audit a shell company. I used to think she was just being her usual overbearing self. I thought she viewed David as a boring number cruncher who lacked the wealth to join our elite circle. I looked at David. The realization hit me like a physical blow. "She does not hate your personality," I said. "She is terrified of your profession." David nodded slowly. "When you announced our engagement, Patricia realized you were officially tying your legal and financial life to a man whose entire career focuses on uncovering financial fraud. She knew it was only a matter of time before I looked at your credit report and found her secret." That is why she wanted Jessica to read my text messages. I continued, my anger boiling over. She needed to know if you had discovered the holding company yet. She was trying to gauge her level of exposure. This was no longer a simple family dispute. This was not about my mother being controlling or my sister acting as a pawn. Patricia and Richard crossed a severe legal line. "They forged your signature on dozens of state and federal documents," David explained, closing the laptop slightly. "They opened commercial bank accounts using your social security number. They filed fraudulent tax returns for over a decade. Olivia, this is not just identity theft. This is wire fraud and tax evasion. If the authorities connect these dots, your parents are looking at federal prison." "And what about me?" I asked. Panic flared in my chest. "If my name is on the paperwork, am I liable for the back taxes?" David reached across the table and took my hand. "I will not let that happen. We have the proof they acted without your knowledge. But we have to move carefully. Your parents have vast resources at their disposal. They will hire ruthless lawyers. They will try to silence you." I put my hand away, standing up from the table. I began pacing the small kitchen. I did not want to be careful. I wanted to burn their empire to the ground. They stole my future to line their own pockets. They smiled at my engagement party while plotting to destroy my partner. "We need to gather every piece of paper tying them to the accounts," I declared. "We need to find the original trust documents or the initial incorporation papers. Whatever they forged 12 years ago." David agreed. He opened his laptop again to access the state property portal. "I need to run a deep dive on Richard's personal associates. We must see who notarized these fraudulent deeds." As he typed, a sharp buzzing sound cut through the tense silence. My phone vibrated against the wooden table. I walked over and picked it up. The screen displayed an automated security alert from my personal bank. It was the account where I kept my modest savings and my direct deposits from work. The text message glowed brightly against the dark screen. "Security alert. Multiple failed login attempts detected on your primary checking account. Your account has been temporarily locked to prevent unauthorized access. If you did not initiate this action, please contact fraud prevention immediately." My blood ran cold. David looked up from his screen, sensing the shift in the room. "What is it?" he asked. I showed him the message. Patricia was not waiting for us to make a move. She knew Jessica had failed to secure the information from my phone. She knew David was getting too close. My mother was going on the offensive. By locking me out of my own money, she was sending a clear, terrifying warning. The war had officially started. The security alert on my screen felt like a physical strike. I did not wait for another message. I tapped the blue icon for my banking application and typed my standard passcode. A red error banner flashed across the top. "Account locked due to suspicious activity. Please contact customer service." I dialed the toll-free number printed on the back of my debit card. The automated system kept me on hold for 10 agonizing minutes. A smooth jazz melody looped endlessly through the speaker, mocking my rising panic. David sat across the table, watching my face tight with worry. He kept his hands resting near his laptop keyboard, ready to help the moment I needed it. Finally, a human voice replaced the hold music. A representative named Sarah asked for my account number and verification PIN. I recited the numbers. Sarah paused her keyboard, clacking through the receiver. "Ms. Smith, I see a fraud alert was placed on this account 20 minutes ago," Sarah explained in a practiced, monotone voice. "The user reported unauthorized transactions and requested an immediate freeze on all outbound transfers." "I did not report any fraud," I said, gripping the edge of the kitchen table. "I am the only person on this account. You need to remove the freeze right now. I have rent due on Monday." Sarah sighed a sound, indicating she dealt with angry customers all day. "I understand your frustration, ma'am. However, the request was initiated through the mobile application. The user successfully bypassed the two-factor authentication by receiving a text code directly to your registered device. Because a security breach was reported, company policy dictates the account must remain frozen until you visit a physical branch with 2 forms of government identification and a notarized affidavit." My stomach plummeted. Jessica. During those 15 minutes in the restaurant restroom, my sister did not just read my messages. She opened my banking app, hit the forgot password link, intercepted the security code sent via text message, and locked me out of my own finances. Patricia directed the entire operation. My mother knew I lived paycheck to paycheck. By freezing my checking account, she cut off my ability to pay rent, buy groceries, or hire a lawyer. Before I could argue further with the bank representative, another sound shattered the quiet of the kitchen. David's cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name Marcus Sterling. Marcus was the senior managing partner at the accounting firm. He never called employees on a Saturday morning unless something catastrophic happened. David answered, putting the device on speaker so I could hear. "Good morning, Marcus," he said, maintaining a professional tone. The voice on the other end did not offer a greeting. "David, we have a critical situation," Marcus stated. His words were clipped and heavy. 10 minutes ago, the corporate compliance office received an anonymous email containing a highly disturbing package of attachments. David frowned, leaning closer to the speaker. "What kind of attachments?" "Screenshots," Marcus replied. "Dozens of text message images. They depict a conversation between your personal cell number and a woman named Patricia Smith. In these messages, you appear to be threatening to use proprietary firm software to audit her private businesses unless she pays you a substantial sum of money." The air left my lungs. I stopped breathing. "Marcus, those are fabricated," David said, his voice rising in volume. "I have never texted Olivia's mother in my life. Someone spoofed the numbers. I can surrender my device to IT right now and prove it." "I want to believe you," David, Marcus said softly. "You are one of my best investigators. But these images look authentic. They include specific references to our internal auditing tools. The anonymous sender claimed you are running an extortion ring using company resources. Because the allegations involve corporate espionage and blackmail, my hands are tied. Human Resources requires me to place you on immediate administrative leave pending a full internal investigation." A sharp click echoed from the table. We both looked down. David's laptop screen, which had been displaying the Georgia State property records just seconds ago, suddenly turned black. A white padlock icon appeared in the center of the monitor. The IT department had remotely severed his access to the firm's network. "I am sorry," David Marcus said. "Do not contact any clients. Do not attempt to log into the servers. We will call you on Monday." The line went dead. The silence in my small apartment became suffocating. The overlapping pressure felt designed to crush us into dust. Within a single hour, Patricia managed to paralyze me financially and strip David of his career. My mother knew she could not fight a forensic accountant in a legal battle, so she removed his weapons. She severed his access to the databases and the software he needed to dismantle her real estate empire. I stared at the black laptop screen. The reflection showed two exhausted, terrified people. I had exactly $40 in my wallet. David was suspended without pay. We were planning a wedding we could no longer afford fighting an enemy with millions of dollars in stolen assets. My phone vibrated again. The screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID showed a picture of Patricia. She was wearing a wide sun hat, smiling on the deck of her country club. The image made my blood boil. I swiped the green button and pressed the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. "Olivia, darling Patricia," sang through the receiver. Her voice dripped with a sickeningly sweet concern. It was the exact tone she used when she wanted to impress her wealthy friends at charity luncheons. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice sounded remarkably steady despite the hurricane of panic ripping through my chest. "I just heard the most dreadful news," Patricia continued, ignoring my cold reception. "A little bird told me you were having some trouble with your bank. And poor David, I heard his firm let him go this morning. Something about unethical behavior. It is such a shame, really. I always knew he lacked the moral compass required for a respectable family." "You framed him," I stated, gripping the phone tight enough to crack the casing. "You hired someone to fake those text messages, and you had Jessica lock my checking account." Patricia let out a soft, dismissive laugh. "You always had such a wild imagination, Olivia. That is why you struggle to succeed in the real world. You invent these grand conspiracies instead of taking responsibility for your own failures. But despite your flaws, I am still your mother. I cannot bear to watch you end up on the street." I waited, refusing to take the bait. I knew a trap lay waiting beneath her synthetic sympathy. "Your father and I want to help you through this difficult transition," she offered smoothly. "We are willing to write you a very generous check today, enough to cover your rent for the next 6 months. We will even help David find a new job, an entry-level position somewhere quiet where he cannot cause any more trouble." "And what is the price for this generous gift?" I asked. Patricia paused. Her voice dropped, the sweet facade becoming hard and direct. "The wedding is off, permanently. You will pack your things and leave that terrible little apartment and move back into the guest house on our estate, and David will drop his investigation into our family finances. If you both agree to walk away quietly, I will make sure you are taken care of. If you refuse, you will find out just how expensive it is to fight a war with no money." She was trying to starve us out. She believed her wealth made her invincible. She thought she could buy my obedience just like she bought those commercial properties using my stolen identity. She expected me to break down, cry, and beg for her mercy. Instead of tears, a cold, calculated fury settled over my bones. The fear evaporated, replaced by a crystalline clarity. My mother was not a god. She was a criminal, relying on intimidation. "Keep your money," I told her. Patricia gasped, clearly shocked by the rejection. "Excuse me? I am not moving into your guest house," I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am not canceling my wedding, and David is not dropping his work. You thought taking my bank account would break me? You thought taking his job would stop us? You are wrong." "Olivia, be reasonable," she snapped, her control slipping. "We are done being reasonable," I replied. "Enjoy your weekend at the country club, Mom, because it is going to be your last." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the table. It slid across the wood and bumped against the locked laptop. David looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pride. He ran a hand through his hair. "What is our next move?" he asked. "We have no network access and no funding." I stood up, walking toward the window that overlooked the busy Atlanta street below. I watched the cars driving past, oblivious to the war raging inside my living room. I crossed my arms over my chest. "We do not need corporate software to find the proof," I said, turning back to face him. "We know exactly where the original documents are hidden. They kept the physical trust papers. Patricia is arrogant. She never throws away a trophy." Before David could ask how we were going to get inside their heavily guarded estate, a sharp knock echoed from my front door. We both froze. Nobody knew where I lived except my parents, David, and Jessica. I walked slowly to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing in the hallway, clutching her silver purse and trembling like a frightened child, was my sister, and she looked like she was ready to talk. I pulled the deadbolt back. Jessica stood in the hallway. Her designer mascara ran down her cheeks in dark streaks. The silver purse she used to steal my phone dangled from her wrist like a broken pendulum. Jessica always played the perfect daughter. She wore the right clothes, attended the right colleges, and never spoke out of turn. Seeing her shake on my welcome mat felt surreal. She pushed past me, pacing the narrow living room of my apartment. Her expensive floral perfume filled the small space, clashing with the smell of my cheap coffee. David stood by the kitchen island, folding his arms. Jessica did not even acknowledge him. She just looked at me, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. "Mom is making me sign papers," she blurted out. Her voice cracked, lacking its usual confident polish. "She called a private notary. They are coming to the house on Monday morning." I closed the front door and locked it. I leaned against the wood, watching her unravel. "What kind of papers, Jessica?" She dropped her purse on my faded sofa. "Transfer deeds," she whispered. "When I was in the restaurant restroom, I saw the email David sent you. I saw the state tax records and the property addresses." Mom was standing right outside the stall door. She was whispering through the crack, demanding to know what you knew. I told her David found the holding company. She turned pale. She started making phone calls before we even reached the car. For 28 years, Jessica lived in a comfortable, pristine bubble. Richard paid the rent for her luxury loft downtown. Patricia bought her a new imported sedan every 3 years. In exchange for this financial blanket, Jessica surrendered her autonomy. She dated the men my parents approved of. She worked a hollow marketing job at a firm owned by Richard's golf partner. She never experienced a single day of financial panic in her life. Now the bill for all that luxury was finally coming due. Patricia knows the government will freeze your accounts the second David files a formal report. Jessica explained, twisting her diamond rings. She needs a new shelter for the money. Because I am the loyal daughter, the one with a clean record who never asks questions, she decided to make me the new primary shareholder. She told me it was just a temporary trust fund for my future inheritance. But I read the fine print on the documents she left on the dining table. I walked over and stood inches from her. She reached out, wanting a hug, wanting the big sister comfort I always provided when we were children, hiding from our parents' arguments. I kept my hands firmly at my sides. I refused to coddle her. If you sign those transfer deeds, you inherit 12 years of unpaid commercial property taxes, I said. My voice was flat and unyielding. You inherit the wire fraud. You inherit the identity theft. When the federal investigators trace the money, they will not arrest Patricia. They will arrest the person whose name is on the current dotted line. That is you. Jessica let out a choked sob. I told her I did not want to do it. Dad yelled at me. He said I owed them for my lifestyle. He said if I did not sign the papers, they would cut me off entirely. I will lose my apartment. I will lose my car. David stepped forward from the kitchen. His tone held zero sympathy. The Department of Justice does not care about your family loyalty, Jessica. If you help them hide stolen assets, you become an accessory after the fact. That carries a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal facility. You will be trading your luxury loft for a concrete cell. Your designer clothes will not help you during a tax evasion trial. Jessica collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs echoed off the thin walls of my apartment. I am so scared, Olivia. Please tell me what to do. I cannot go to prison. I looked at David. A silent agreement passed between us. The enemy just handed us a weapon. Patricia ruled her household through fear and financial control, but she pushed her golden child too far. We needed to exploit this crack in their armor. I will help you, I told her, but you are going to work for it. You are going to help us tear their empire apart from the inside. Jessica peeked through her trembling fingers. How? Patricia and Richard keep physical copies of everything, I explained, stepping closer to ensure she heard every word. They do not trust cloud storage or digital servers. The original incorporation documents, the forged signatures, the initial trust papers, they are sitting somewhere inside that house. We need them. Jessica shook her head rapidly. Dad keeps his home office locked at all times. He installed a new deadbolt last year after the cleaning lady accidentally threw away a bank statement. You cannot get in there. David knows how to pick a standard pin tumbler lock, I replied, keeping my gaze locked on her terrified eyes. We just need to get inside the main house without triggering the perimeter security system. I knew my parents' schedule perfectly. They were creatures of rigid, unbending habit. Every Sunday afternoon, rain or shine, Richard and Patricia drove to their private country club for a standing golf reservation and an early dinner with the board of directors. They left the estate at noon sharp and never returned before 5 o'clock. Tomorrow is Sunday, I said. They will leave for the club. You are going to stay behind claiming you have a migraine. At 1 o'clock, you will disable the driveway alarm and unlock the back door leading into the sunroom. Then you will drive away. Go to a busy coffee shop, buy a drink, and keep the receipt. Make sure you are on camera across town when we go inside. Jessica wiped her eyes, smearing the dark makeup across her cheekbones. Mom said she was protecting the family legacy. She said you were ungrateful for the life they provided. She told me I had to step up and protect our name. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. They provided me with a locked checking account and a suspended fiancé. They stole my name, Jessica. They used me to build a fortress, and now they want to use you as the moat to protect themselves from the fallout. Are you really willing to ruin your life to protect their country club memberships? The harsh truth finally hit her. The golden child saw the heavy rust beneath the shiny paint of our family dynamic. She realized our parents viewed us as tools, not daughters. If you leave that door open, I promised we will take the physical documents straight to the prosecutor. We will testify that our parents forced you to act under extreme duress. We will keep your name out of the federal indictment. But if you back out, or if you warn them we are coming, I will hand over the security footage of you stealing my phone at the restaurant. I will make sure the police know you were the one who locked my bank account. I hated threatening my own flesh and blood. It made my stomach churn. But Patricia taught me how to play hardball, and I was no longer the naive girl she could manipulate. Jessica swallowed hard, staring at the scuffed hardwood floor. "The sunroom door," she whispered. "I will leave it open at 1 o'clock. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked to the front door. She did not offer a goodbye. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving a heavy silence in the apartment. David turned to me, his jaw set tight. He was a professional accountant, a man who followed the rules and respected the law. Now he was preparing to commit a felony, breaking and entering to save our future. We had no money in the bank, we had no network access to his firm, but we had a clear vulnerability in their fortress. The war was no longer being fought through glowing screens and anonymous emails. It was moving to the physical world. Tomorrow, we were infiltrating the estate. The Sunday afternoon sun beat down on the Georgia asphalt, radiating a suffocating heat. David parked his car 3 blocks away from my parents' neighborhood. We did not want any neighbors recognizing his vehicle. We walked the rest of the way in silence, staying close to the manicured hedges lining the wide sidewalks. My parents lived in a gated community, but I knew the pedestrian access code from my teenage years. The iron gate swung open with a quiet hum. We slipped inside, walking briskly toward the sprawling brick estate that served as my childhood home. Every perfectly trimmed lawn and expensive imported fountain felt like a sharp insult. My checking account was locked. I had less than $50 to my name. Meanwhile, Patricia and Richard lived in a fortress funded by my stolen identity. We approached the rear of the property, keeping our heads down. The backyard featured a pristine swimming pool and a large glass-enclosed sunroom. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. If my parents caught us inside, Patricia would not hesitate to dial 911. She would relish the opportunity to have David and me arrested for felony burglary. It would solve all her problems instantly. I reached the handle of the sunroom door. I pressed my thumb against the latch and pushed. The heavy glass door clicked and swung inward. Jessica kept her word. She left the perimeter alarm disabled and the lock disengaged. We stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind us. The air conditioning hit my sweat-dampened skin, raising goosebumps along my arms. The house smelled of lemon furniture polish and fresh lilies. It was silent save for the low hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent gourmet kitchen. I pointed toward the main hallway, signaling David to follow. We moved quickly across the polished hardwood floors. Our sneakers barely made a sound. We navigated the maze of expensive antique furniture and family portraits hanging on the walls. Every picture showed a smiling, perfect family. None of it was real. We reached the end of the east wing. Richard maintained a private study here. He treated the room like a sacred vault, forbidding anyone from entering without his explicit permission. The heavy mahogany door stood before us, shut tight. I turned the brass knob. It did not budge. David pulled a small leather pouch from his jacket pocket. During his early years training as a forensic accountant, his firm required him to complete courses on physical security auditing. Tracing digital money often required accessing locked filing cabinets in hostile corporate environments. He unrolled the pouch, revealing a set of thin steel tools. He knelt in front of the door, sliding a tension wrench into the bottom of the keyhole. "Keep an eye on the driveway through the window," he whispered, his focus entirely on the brass cylinder. I stood by the window watching the empty paved circle outside. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked each second, amplifying my anxiety. The country club lunch usually lasted until 3 o'clock, but Patricia possessed a ruthless intuition. If she sensed Jessica was lying about the migraine, she might return early to check the house. A sharp mechanical click echoed from the doorknob. David stood up, turning the handle. The door swung open. We slipped into the study. The room was dark, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the afternoon glare. Richard's desk sat in the center, a huge slab of dark wood covered in neat stacks of paper. Behind the desk, nestled into the custom bookshelves, sat the primary target, a heavy steel fireproof safe. Jessica provided the numerical combination during her breakdown in my apartment. I walked over to the digital keypad, my fingers trembling as I punched in the 6 digits. The small screen beeped. A bright red light flashed across the panel. Invalid entry. I swallowed hard, clearing the screen. I typed the numbers again, pressing each button with deliberate force. Beep. Red light. Invalid entry. Panic gripped my throat. I looked at David. "She changed it," I said, my voice barely audible. "When she realized you found the holding company yesterday, she must have changed every security code in the house. The safe is locked out." David inspected the keypad, his jaw clenched tight. The steel casing offered no weak points. We could not force it open without heavy machinery, which would trigger the internal glass break sensors. We hit a dead end. The documents proving their financial crimes were sitting inches away, trapped behind impenetrable steel. "We need to search the rest of the room," David instructed, stepping away from the safe. "People get careless when they panic. If Patricia spent the weekend rearranging her secure files, she might have moved the older records to make room for current bank statements." We tore through the study. I checked every drawer in the desk. I sifted through the filing cabinets. We found nothing but old utility bills and country club newsletters. The digital clock on the desk flipped to 1:45. We were running out of time. David walked through an adjoining door that connected the study to a small guest bedroom. He dropped to his knees, shining his phone flashlight under the heavy oak bed frame. "Olivia, get in here," he called out. I hurried into the guest room. David reached under the bed and dragged out a large, reinforced cardboard banker's box. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, suggesting it had been shoved into the dark corner years ago and forgotten. I knelt beside him and looked at the white label pasted on the side of the lid. Patricia's elegant cursive handwriting spelled out 3 words: Olivia's College Fund. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stared at the ink. I remembered crying at my kitchen table when I was 20 years old, staring at a mountain of student loan debt. I remembered begging my mother to co-sign a lower interest rate application, only for her to lecture me about financial responsibility. All those years of eating cheap food, working double shifts, and losing sleep over my credit score. They kept a box labeled with my struggle hidden under a guest bed. It was a cruel, sickening joke. "Open it," I told David. My voice shook with a newfound freezing rage. He pulled the lid off. The box smelled like old paper and dried ink. The top layer consisted of old report cards and meaningless childhood drawings. They used my childhood memories as a decoy layer. David dug deeper, pulling out the nostalgic trash and tossing it aside. At the very bottom lay a thick legal binder bound in black leather. David hauled the heavy binder out and flipped it open on the guest bed. The pages were crisp, filled with dense legal typography. I read the header on the first page: The Thomas Smith Beneficiary Trust. Thomas was my late grandfather. He passed away when I was 16. My parents always told me he died penniless, leaving behind nothing but debts they graciously paid off. That was a lie. David traced his finger down the page, analyzing the dense financial clauses. "This is an original wet ink trust document," he explained, his eyes widening as he read the numbers. "Your grandfather did not die broke. He left behind a substantial estate. This legal directive explicitly ordered the bank to release the entire principal sum directly to you on your 25th birthday." I stared at the numbers. It was enough money to pay off my student loans 10 times over. It was enough to buy a house in cash. It was the foundation for a secure, peaceful life. "Keep turning the pages," I urged, feeling a bitter sting behind my eyes. David flipped to the back of the binder. The final section contained transfer deeds and notary stamps. A signed authorization form instructed the primary holding bank to dissolve the trust early and reroute the entire balance into a new commercial real estate limited liability company. The same company David found on my credit report. The same company funding my parents' lavish lifestyle. And at the bottom of the transfer authorization, sitting right next to the date, was my signature. "I did not sign this," I said, tracing the blue ink. The curves were slightly off, the pressure was wrong. Patricia forged my name. "They did not just use your social security number to dodge taxes," David realized, pulling his phone from his pocket. "They stole your seed money. They hijacked your grandfather's inheritance, funneled the cash into their shell company, and used your stolen identity to shield the profits from the IRS. This is the Holy Grail. This proves the initial theft." David opened his camera application. "We need a digital copy of every single page," he said, snapping a photo of the forged signature. "We cannot risk stealing the physical binder yet. If they notice it is missing, they will flee the state before we can file the police report." He began turning the pages rapidly, the camera shutter clicking in rapid succession. I stood guard by the bedroom door, my adrenaline spiking with every flash of the lens. We had the evidence. We had the weapon required to dismantle their entire operation and send them both to a federal courtroom. "Just 10 more pages," David whispered, his fingers flying across the paper. A loud, unmistakable sound ripped through the quiet afternoon. Outside the window, heavy tires crushed the gravel of the front driveway. I rushed to the glass and peeked through the edge of the velvet curtains. Patricia's silver luxury SUV rolled to a stop right in front of the main entrance. The engine cut off. The driver's side door swung open. Patricia stepped onto the pavement wearing her pristine white golf attire, her face twisted in a severe scowl. She was home hours ahead of schedule. The trap was closing, and we were standing right in the center of it. Patricia inserted her key into the front entrance. The heavy brass lock tumbling echoed down the long hallway, freezing the blood in my veins. David did not flinch. His hands moved with steady precision. He snapped 3 final photos of the notary stamps, closed the thick leather binder, and shoved it back into the cardboard box. He threw the childhood drawings over the top, concealing the legal papers, and pushed the box deep under the guest bed. We sprinted out of the study. I pulled the heavy mahogany door shut just as the front entrance groaned open. The sharp clatter of Patricia and her golf cleats hitting the marble foyer tile warned us she was moving fast. We ducked into the adjoining laundry room. The space smelled of expensive lavender detergent and warm dryer sheets. I pressed my back against the side of the washing machine, holding my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Patricia shouted Jessica's name. Her voice was laced with sharp irritation, demanding to know why the alarm system was disengaged. We waited in the suffocating silence. A minute passed. Her footsteps finally moved toward the grand staircase and headed to the second floor. David grabbed the handle of the side service door. We slipped out into the sweltering Georgia afternoon and ran across the manicured lawn. We stayed low, using the tall hedges for cover, until we reached the pedestrian gate. We did not stop moving until we reached the car parked 3 blocks away. David slammed his door shut and started the engine. He merged onto the main road, putting miles between us and the gated community. My lungs burned. The adrenaline slowly drained from my system, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in my chest. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the digital gallery. The bright screen displayed the wet ink signature of my late grandfather. The sight of his familiar handwriting broke something inside me. He loved me. He spent his final months sitting on our front porch telling me I would never have to worry about my future. He created that trust to ensure I could attend any university I wanted. He wanted me to buy a home and start a family without the crushing weight of financial stress. My parents took that final act of love and twisted it into a tax shelter for their commercial real estate empire. I stared out the passenger window. The blurry shapes of suburban houses passed by in a gray haze. I remembered crying in my cramped dorm room, deciding which meals to skip so I could afford my biology textbooks. I remembered working a double shift at a diner on my 25th birthday, serving coffee to strangers while my feet ached. That was the exact day my grandfather instructed the bank to release the funds to me. Instead, Patricia and Richard forged my name. They stole my inheritance and used the money to purchase a retail strip mall. I remembered Patricia pulling up to my college graduation in a brand new imported sports car. She wore diamond earrings that cost more than my entire tuition. She handed me a cheap greeting card and told me, "Hard work built character." They watched me drown. They stood on the shoreline counting the money they stole from my life raft. The realization severed the final fraying thread of duty I felt toward them. They were not my family. They were predators hiding behind country club memberships and designer clothes. David reached across the center console and squeezed my hand. "We have everything we need," he said. His voice was steady and reassuring. "We take this to the district attorney on Monday morning. Your parents will spend the next 10 years answering for this fraud." Night fell over Atlanta, casting long shadows across my small apartment. The street lights flickered outside the window. We sat on the sofa, drafting a timeline of events for the federal prosecutor. We needed our facts perfectly aligned before stepping into a government building. Then the silence shattered. My cell phone vibrated against the coffee table. The caller ID flashed Richard's name. I stared at the glowing screen. David paused his typing and looked over. "Let it ring," he advised. We do not owe them a conversation. We have the evidence. But I needed to know their next move. I swiped the screen and pressed the speaker icon. "Hello," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Olivia," my father replied. His voice adopted a smooth, measured cadence. It was the exact tone he used when negotiating corporate mergers. He sounded calm, rational, and entirely fake. "Your mother and I have been discussing the unfortunate misunderstandings of the past few days. We recognize tensions are running high. We want to extend an olive branch." He paused, waiting for me to express gratitude. I remained silent. "We want to host a peace treaty dinner tomorrow evening at the estate," Richard continued, unfazed by my quiet reception. "Just the four of us. We can put all this nonsense behind us. In fact, I already made a few phone calls to Marcus Sterling. I can have David reinstated at the accounting firm by Tuesday morning." A sharp spike of fury hit my chest. My father just casually confessed to orchestrating the sabotage of David's career. He used his wealth and connections to place my fiancé on administrative leave. Now he was offering the job back like a twisted wedding gift, expecting us to grovel for his mercy. "Why the sudden change of heart?" I asked. My father chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Family is the most important thing we possess, Olivia. We want to move forward. We will have our attorney draft a simple, non-disclosure agreement to protect the family businesses. Once you and David sign it, we can all return to normal." There it was, the trap. They realized Jessica failed to secure my phone. They knew David was suspended, meaning he could not access his firm's database to run further audits. They thought we were broke, terrified, and desperate. Richard wanted to lure us into his fortress, slide a legal gag order across the dining table, and force us to sign away our rights in exchange for our livelihood. If we went to the estate, we would be playing on his turf. We would be surrounded by his security cameras, his locked doors, and his expensive lawyers. They would use intimidation to break us down. A year ago, I would have caved. I would have accepted the scraps they offered just to stop the fighting. I spent my entire life avoiding their wrath. But the girl who craved their approval died the moment I saw my grandfather's forged trust document hidden in a cardboard box. I looked at David. He shook his head silently, urging me to decline the invitation. He pointed toward the laptop, reminding me we already won the war. Instead, I leaned closer to the microphone. "We will meet with you," I told my father. Richard sighed, a sound of smug victory filtering through the speaker. "Excellent. We will expect you at 7 o'clock sharp. Dress nicely." "No," I interrupted. My voice dropped to a hard, unyielding pitch. "We are not coming to the estate. If you want a peace treaty, you will come to my apartment. Tomorrow night at 7. Just you and Mom. Bring the paperwork." The line went silent. Richard despised giving up control. He hated my apartment. He hated stepping outside his curated environment where his money dictated the rules. But he needed those signatures to shield himself from a federal indictment. "Fine," he finally clipped, his friendly facade cracking. "We will see you tomorrow." The call ended. I locked my phone and set it down on the table. David stared at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Why did you invite them here?" he asked. "We do not need to sign anything. We have the photos. We have the proof." "Because handing a file to a prosecutor is too easy," I replied. My hand stopped shaking. A cold calm settled over my mind. "They spent 31 years making me feel small. They tried to ruin your career. They stole my money. I am not going to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I am going to let them walk into my home, confess their crimes, and seal their own fate." The bait was set. The predators were coming to my territory, and they had no idea I was the one holding the trap. The knock resonated through my apartment exactly at 7 o'clock. Richard valued punctuality above all else, treating every family interaction like a strict corporate deadline. I stood in the center of my small living room, my pulse thudding against my ribs. I glanced at David. He offered a single reassuring nod, his posture rigid and prepared. I walked forward, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the front door open. My father stood in the hallway wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Patricia flanked him, clutching a pristine leather handbag, her lips painted a sharp crimson. But they did not honor my conditions. They did not come alone. A tall, gray-haired man in a navy pinstripe suit stepped out from behind my father. He held a thick leather briefcase tight against his side. His eyes darted around my modest apartment, calculating the value of my faded sofa and thrift store furniture. We agreed on just the two of you, I stated, gripping the edge of the door to block the threshold. Richard pushed past my shoulder, forcing me to step backward. He walked into my home with the unearned authority of a man who believed he owned everything he surveyed. The stranger followed close behind his expensive dress shoes, clicking against my scuffed hardwood floor. "This is Mr. Harrison," my father announced, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "He represents the family interests. Since we are discussing serious legal matters tonight, his presence is non-negotiable." Patricia walked in last. She paused in the entryway, wrinkling her nose as if the air in my apartment was somehow offensive to her lungs. She brushed past me without a greeting and walked straight to my small wooden dining table. Before sitting down, she pulled a tissue from her handbag and conspicuously wiped the surface of the chair. The silent insult hung heavy in the room. I closed the door, locking it behind them. The trap was sprung, but the predators believed they were the ones holding the cage. Mr. Harrison placed his briefcase on my kitchen table. The sharp snap of the brass latches echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick stack of premium bond paper, bound by a heavy black clip. He slid the packet across the wood, stopping it directly in front of the empty chair opposite my mother. "Given the recent unfortunate tensions regarding your upcoming marriage, your parents feel this is the safest path forward," the lawyer said. His voice was smooth, practiced, and entirely devoid of emotion. "They wish to ensure marital harmony and protect the legacy of the Smith estate." David stepped up beside me, his jaw clenched tight. "We do not need a prenuptial agreement," he told the lawyer. "Olivia and I are combining our finances. We have no separate assets to protect." Mr. Harrison offered a thin, condescending smile. "I highly recommend you read the terms before declining, Mr. Smith." I pulled out the wooden chair and sat down. The header on the first page did not read like a standard marriage contract. It spelled out in bold black ink, "Premarital Asset Protection and Non-Disclosure Agreement." I flipped to the second page. The legalese was dense, filled with endless clauses and corporate jargon, but the underlying intent sliced through the complicated vocabulary with crystal clarity. Paragraph 4 demanded David surrender his professional license to audit, review, investigate, or otherwise examine any corporate entity tied to the Smith family. It essentially banned him from ever looking into their shell companies again. I turned another page, my fingers brushing against the heavy paper. Paragraph 7 contained the true poison. The clause required my signature to formally relinquish all equity shares, administrative rights, and historical claims to the Georgia Commercial Real Estate Holding Company. It ordered the immediate transfer of those assets back to Patricia. They were not asking for a peace treaty. They brought a ransom note disguised as a legal contract. "This document forces me to sign away my grandfather's trust fund," I said, keeping my tone carefully neutral. Richard walked over and stood behind Patricia, resting his hands on the back of her chair. "It is a reset button, Olivia. You sign those papers tonight, and the unfortunate incident at David's accounting firm disappears by tomorrow morning." My father smiled, a cold, predatory grin devoid of any paternal warmth. "I spoke with Marcus Sterling this afternoon," Richard continued. "He is eager to welcome one of his best forensic accountants back to the office, provided the anonymous allegations of extortion are formally withdrawn. A single phone call from me clears his record. Your fiancé can return to his career, and you can proceed with your quaint little wedding." The sheer audacity paralyzed my lungs. My father just stood in my kitchen and casually admitted to framing the man I loved. He used his immense corporate influence to strangle our income, severing David's network access, and now he was offering to undo the damage in exchange for our permanent silence. He wanted me to legally gift him the millions of dollars he stole from my inheritance. "And if we refuse to sign this extortion contract?" I asked, looking up from the thick stack of paper. Patricia leaned forward, resting her manicured hands on the table. Her eyes gleamed with a vicious, triumphant light. "Then we go to the police," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sorrow. "Go to the police for what?" David challenged, crossing his arms. "We hold the proof of your tax evasion." Patricia turned her freezing gaze toward him. "We will go to the authorities to report a devastating case of elder abuse, David. My husband and I are aging citizens. We built a modest nest egg to protect our retirement years, and now our vulnerable, financially unstable daughter has fallen under the spell of a sophisticated predator." She paused, letting the threat settle into the room. You manipulated Olivia into hacking our private accounts, Patricia lied, weaving her fabricated narrative with chilling ease. You used your specialized computer skills to steal our banking passwords. You tried to extort us for cash, and when we refused to pay your ransom, you threatened to ruin our reputation. We have the text messages to prove it. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. A ringing sound started in my ears. She was threatening to send David to a federal penitentiary using fabricated charges of financial exploitation against the elderly. She knew a forensic accountant accused of exploiting seniors would never work in the financial sector again. He would lose his license. He would face severe jail time. The police will look at a respected businessman and his wife, Mr. Harrison interjected, adjusting his silk tie. Then they will look at a young, suspended accountant and a woman with $40 in her checking account. Who do you think the district attorney will believe? They boxed us in. They constructed a narrative so twisted and backward, it felt suffocating. They expected me to scream. They expected me to cry, tear the paper in half, or beg for mercy. They needed an emotional reaction to prove they retained control over my mind. I looked at David. His eyes burned with a silent, protective rage. He was ready to throw them out of the apartment, ready to fight the charges in court, regardless of the cost. But fighting their wealth in a traditional courtroom without resources was a losing battle. I needed to secure the final piece of the puzzle. I needed them to feel invincible. I lowered my head, letting my shoulders slump forward. I relaxed my facial muscles, projecting the image of a broken, defeated daughter. The silence in the kitchen stretched heavy and thick, punctuated only by the ticking of the cheap wall clock above the refrigerator. "You win," I whispered, staring down at the prenuptial agreement. Patricia let out a soft, satisfied sigh. She unclasped her designer handbag and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. She slid the pen across the table. It stopped right next to the signature line. "I always knew you would eventually see reason, Olivia. You just needed a firm push in the right direction." I reached out with my right hand, wrapping my trembling fingers around the cold gold casing of the pen. I kept my head down, acting as though the weight of their victory crushed my spirit. As I pulled the contract closer to read the final signature line, I slowly slid my left hand into the pocket of my cardigan sweater. My fingers brushed against the smooth glass screen of my smartphone. I found the tactile side button, pressing it twice in rapid succession. A subtle, silent vibration pulsed against my thigh, confirming the hidden voice recorder application was now running. The heavy gold pen rested between my fingers. The ink cartridge hovered a fraction of an inch above the thick bond paper. My left hand remained tucked inside my sweater pocket, the faint warmth of my phone assuring me the recording application was capturing every sound in the room. I kept my gaze fixed on the table, maintaining the illusion of total defeat. David shifted his weight beside me. He did not know about the hidden microphone. I could feel his frustration radiating in the narrow kitchen. He wanted to grab the contract and tear it into pieces. I gently nudged his shoe with my sneaker under the table, a silent plea for him to trust me. "Before I put my name on this page," I said, keeping my voice low and unsteady, "I just need to understand how we got here." Patricia sighed. It was a loud, exasperated sound, the kind a parent makes when a toddler refuses to eat their vegetables. "Oh, Olivia, let us not drag this out with unnecessary drama. Just sign the document so we can all go home." I looked up, meeting her cold gaze. "I am giving you everything you want, Mom. I am signing away my rights to a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. I think I deserve to know how my name ended up on those incorporation papers 12 years ago. I did not sign them." Patricia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. A triumphant smirk played at the corners of her mouth. She believed she had won the war. She thought the contract in front of me was a surrender flag, making her invincible. That arrogance was her greatest weakness. "Of course you did not sign them," Patricia scoffed. "Your father and I handled the paperwork. We needed a clean Social Security number to structure the holding company properly. You were 19 years old, serving coffee and complaining about your biology exams. You were far too financially illiterate to comprehend the complexity of commercial real estate investments. We did what any responsible parent would do. We managed the assets for you. You forged my signature on state tax documents," I clarified, ensuring the hidden microphone picked up the exact legal terminology. Mr. Harrison, the lawyer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He reached out, perhaps wanting to stop his client from speaking so freely, but Richard waved him off. Richard felt untouchable in his tailored suit, looking down at my faded furniture. "Do not use such ugly words," Richard reprimanded. "We streamlined a bureaucratic process. We protected the family wealth from unnecessary government interference." I turned my attention to my father. "Family wealth," I repeated. "The money used to purchase those commercial properties did not come from your private investment firm. It came from Grandpa Thomas." The smirk vanished from Patricia's face, replaced by a flash of genuine irritation. She hated being reminded that her initial wealth came from her father, not her own labor. "He left that money in a trust specifically for me," I pressed, pushing her buttons with calculated precision. "The legal directive explicitly ordered the bank to release the funds to me on my 25th birthday. You stole my inheritance." Patricia slammed her manicured hand flat against the kitchen table. The sudden noise made the lawyer jump. "Stole," she hissed, her voice rising in pitch. "How dare you accuse us of theft after everything we sacrificed for you? We raised you, Olivia. We fed you. We clothed you. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to maintain our standard of living?" I gripped the edge of my seat. "You stole my future to pay for your country club memberships." "We took what was rightfully ours," Patricia snapped, her anger overriding whatever minimal caution she usually possessed. "My father was a foolish old man who did not understand how the modern economy worked. Handing a massive fortune to a naive girl would have been a disaster. You would have wasted it on something trivial. We took that capital, invested it in commercial real estate, and multiplied it. We used those profits to secure our position in society. You owe us for providing you with a respectable family name." I let her words hang in the air. The recording was capturing pure gold. She just confessed to intercepting a legal trust fund and committing felony fraud to fund her lavish lifestyle. And when David found out, I continued, shifting my focus back to the immediate threat. "You panicked." Richard stepped forward, his corporate mask slipping to reveal the ruthless bully underneath. "Your fiancé became a liability," my father stated, pointing a thick finger at David. "He started asking dangerous questions. He used his position at the accounting firm to dig into matters that did not concern him. I warned you years ago, Olivia. I told you bringing an investigator into this family was a mistake." "So you framed him," I said, making sure the accusation was loud and clear. "You manufactured fake text messages and sent them to Marcus Sterling to destroy his career. I protected my investments," Richard countered, his voice cold and devoid of any remorse. "I made one phone call to the compliance office and they escorted him out of the building. That is how the real world operates. The people with the gold make the rules. David is a smart boy, but he forgot his place." "If we do not sign this prenuptial agreement today," David asked, speaking for the first time since the lawyer arrived, "what happens tomorrow?" Richard did not hesitate. He relished the opportunity to swing the executioner's axe. "If you refuse to sign, I will make another phone call. I will ensure the extortion allegations are upgraded to a formal criminal complaint. I sit on the board of directors for 3 different regional banks. I know every senior managing partner in the state of Georgia. I will personally guarantee that you never work in the financial sector again. You will lose your license, your reputation, and your freedom." Patricia nodded in agreement, a cruel glint in her eyes. "And we will proceed with the elder abuse charges against you both. We will tell the judge you manipulated us, hacked our accounts, and tried to bleed us dry. You think a judge will believe that I asked, feigning a tremor in my voice? You think the police will just take your word for it?" Patricia let out a sharp, brittle laugh. It was a sound devoid of any maternal affection. "Oh, my sweet, naive girl. Look around you. Look at this pathetic, cramped apartment. Look at your suspended fiancé. Now, look at us." She gestured to her designer clothes and Richard's expensive suit. "We are prominent members of the Atlanta social elite. We donate heavily to the district attorney's re-election campaigns. We host charity galas for the local police foundation. Who do you honestly think they will believe? A wealthy, respected couple with decades of community service, or a struggling 31-year-old woman who cannot even access her own checking account?" The pressure in the room reached its absolute peak. She was trying to rewrite reality using her wealth as a weapon to distort the truth. She wanted me to feel tiny, insignificant, and powerless against her social machinery. "They will look at you," Patricia whispered, leaning closer across the table, her floral perfume suffocating the space between us. and they will see a bitter, greedy child trying to steal from her own parents. You have no money. You have no power. You have no voice. Sign the paper, Olivia. Take the meager scrap of peace we are offering you and go back to your quiet little life." The silence that followed was heavy. The lawyer tapped his fingers impatiently against his leather briefcase. Richard checked his expensive wristwatch, eager to leave my neighborhood and return to his mansion. I sat frozen in my chair. For 31 years, I let this woman dictate my worth. I let her insults chip away at my confidence. I allowed her to convince me I was ungrateful, difficult, and destined for failure. I spent my entire youth shrinking myself to fit inside the tiny box she built for me. But as I sat there, listening to the hidden recorder capture every single vile admission, the box shattered. I had Patricia confessing to forgery. I had her detailing the theft of my grandfather's trust fund. I had Richard bragging about his calculated sabotage of David's career, followed immediately by a direct, undeniable threat of extortion. They delivered a perfect, airtight federal case directly into my pocket. I looked down at the gold fountain pen resting in my hand. It caught the dim light of the kitchen overhead fixture. "Sign it," Richard commanded, his patience officially exhausted. I slowly rolled the pen between my thumb and index finger. I took a deep, steadying breath. The air in my lungs felt cleaner than it had in a decade. The act of a defeated daughter dissolved, falling away like a heavy winter coat. I opened my hand. The heavy gold pen slipped through my fingers. It hit the wooden table with a sharp clatter, rolling across the grain and coming to a stop against the lawyer's leather briefcase. Patricia frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together in sudden confusion. "What are you doing?" I pushed my chair back and stood up. I did not look at the contract. I looked my mother dead in the eye. The fear that had lived in my chest since childhood was gone, replaced by a cold, untouchable armor. I smiled. "No," I said, "I do not think I will." The silence in my kitchen stretched to a breaking point. My mother stared at the gold fountain pen resting against the lawyer's leather briefcase. She blinked twice, unable to process my refusal. For 3 decades, a single sharp command from her lips always forced my compliance. Tonight, her spell failed. Richard slammed his palm flat against the tabletop. The coffee mugs rattled. "You are making a catastrophic mistake, Olivia. I am offering you a lifeline. If we walk out that door without your signature, I will dial Marcus Sterling from the car. David will be clearing his desk by tomorrow morning." I stepped away from the table, walking toward the small kitchen counter. I kept my back turned to them for a brief second. My hands were perfectly steady. I picked up a plain brown manila envelope I had hidden next to the microwave. "You are not calling anyone," I said, turning around to face them. Patricia let out a harsh, mocking sound. "Or what? You will throw a temper tantrum. You have zero leverage here. We hold all the cards. We own the board." I walked back to the dining table. I opened the flap of the envelope and pulled out a stack of 8x10 glossy photographs. I did not say a word. I simply dropped the stack directly on top of their fraudulent prenuptial agreement. The glossy paper fanned out across the wood. The top photograph displayed the crisp wedding signature of my late grandfather. The second photo showed the heavy black notary stamps. The third photo zoomed in on the transfer authorization clause, clearly showcasing the clumsy forgery of my own name. The temperature in the room plummeted. Patricia looked down at the table. The smug, triumphant sneer melted off her face in a matter of seconds. Her skin turned the color of old parchment. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat like a physical obstruction. She recognized the documents instantly. She knew they were safely hidden inside a fireproof safe, inside a locked study, inside her gated estate. Or so she thought. "Where did you get those?" Patricia whispered. Her voice lacked all of its previous authority. It sounded small and brittle. Richard stared at the glossy prints. The reality of the breach hit him. His pristine corporate armor cracked. He lunged across the table, his expensive suit jacket knocking over a water glass. He reached for the photographs, desperate to snatch the physical evidence and tear it apart. David moved faster. He stepped in front of me, planting his feet firmly on the hardwood floor. He caught Richard by the wrist, stopping my father midway across the table. "Do not touch anything on that table," David instructed. His voice was low, calm, and carried the quiet danger of a man who knew exactly how to dismantle a threat. "And do not ever reach toward my fiancée again." Richard yanked his arm back, rubbing his wrist. He tried to maintain his intimidating posture, but his eyes darted nervously toward the photos. "Those are stolen property," my father snapped, trying to reclaim the high ground. "You broke into our home. That is a felony, David. I will have you arrested for burglary before midnight." I shook my head, feeling a profound sense of pity for the man who thought he could outsmart a forensic investigator. "You cannot arrest anyone for stealing photos," I corrected him, "and tearing up these prints will not save you. We left the physical binder tucked right back under your guest bed. These are just visual aids." Patricia gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning bone white. "You have nothing," she insisted, though her voice shook. "A few pictures prove nothing. We have the best defense attorneys in the state of Georgia. They will bury you in litigation." David folded his arms across his chest. "You will need those attorneys very soon," he advised. "When Olivia and I left your estate yesterday afternoon, we did not just drive home. I spent the last 10 years working in financial compliance. I built a very specific network. I know exactly who handles high-level corporate fraud for the federal government." David paused, letting the weight of his words sink into their minds. "At 4 o'clock yesterday," David continued, "I encrypted those digital image files and sent them directly to a senior prosecutor at the Department of Justice. The email is time-stamped. The evidence is already logged into a federal server. They are currently reviewing the forged signatures, the transfer deeds, and 12 years of fraudulent tax returns filed under Olivia's Social Security number." Richard staggered backward. He bumped into the kitchen counter, his mouth hanging slightly open. He spent his entire career manipulating local politicians and bullying small business owners. He knew how to fix a local problem, but a federal probe into his private investment firm meant an automatic freeze on all his assets. It meant search warrants. It meant public ruin. But the trap was not fully sprung. I needed to finish the job. "You framed David because you thought he was a threat," I said, stepping out from behind him. "You tried to force me to sign this contract by threatening to report us for elder abuse. You thought your wealth made your lies undeniable." I pulled my cell phone out of my sweater pocket. I tapped the screen, bringing up the digital voice recorder application. The timer showed 22 minutes of captured audio. I adjusted the volume to the maximum setting and pressed play. The audio filled my small kitchen. The sound quality was perfectly clear. My father's recorded voice echoed off the walls. "I spoke with Marcus Sterling this afternoon. He is eager to welcome one of his best forensic accountants back to the office, provided the anonymous allegations of extortion are formally withdrawn." Then Patricia's voice played through the speaker, dripping with malice. "We will go to the authorities to report a devastating case of elder abuse. You manipulated Olivia into hacking our private accounts. We have the text messages to prove it." I let the recording play until Patricia explicitly admitted to forging my signature on the trust documents. Once her confession rang out, I pressed pause. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. The power dynamic in the room inverted entirely. The prominent Georgia socialites who marched into my home issuing ultimatums were gone. In their place stood two cornered criminals facing decades behind bars. Patricia began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved rapidly. She clawed at the collar of her silk blouse, struggling to draw oxygen into her lungs. The pristine facade cracked, revealing a terrified woman realizing her country club days were over. "Delete that recording right now," Richard demanded. His voice cracked, sounding desperate and hollow. "I will pay you whatever you want. Name your price, Olivia. Tell me how much cash it will take to wipe that phone." Before I could answer, a frantic rustling sound interrupted us. Mr. Harrison, the attorney, stood up so fast his wooden chair tipped over backward. It hit the floor with a loud crack. He did not bother to pick it up. He was staring at my cell phone as if it were an explosive device. The lawyer understood the law better than my parents did. He recognized exactly what just transpired. He attended a meeting where his clients presented a fraudulent legal contract designed to extort a federal witness, and he brought the paperwork. I am leaving, Mr. Harrison announced, his voice tight with panic. He reached across the table, grabbed the prenuptial agreement, and shoved it recklessly into his briefcase. He did not care about folding the pages neatly. He just wanted the evidence out of his sight. Richard turned toward him, his face red with panic. "Where are you going? You are our legal counsel. You need to handle this situation. Tell her she cannot use an unauthorized recording." Mr. Harrison snapped the brass latches of his briefcase shut. "I am not your legal counsel," he stated, backing away toward the front door. "As of this exact second, I am formally withdrawing my representation of the Smith family and all associated corporate entities. You used my firm to facilitate an extortion attempt. You hid a federal investigation from me. If I stay in this room another minute, the State Bar Association will strip my license." The lawyer fumbled with the deadbolt. His hand shook so badly he struggled to turn the lock. He yanked the door open and sprinted down the hallway, not looking back once. The heavy door swung shut behind him, sealing my parents inside. Patricia and Richard were left entirely alone. Their money could not buy their way out of my kitchen. Their expensive attorney abandoned them to save himself. They were stripped of their leverage, their legal protection, and their false sense of superiority. Patricia stopped, gasping for air. The sheer terror in her eyes hardened, mutating into something dark, venomous, and deeply unpredictable. She realized pleading would not work. She realized bribery failed. When a predator loses all its traps, it relies on its fangs. She stepped away from the table, her gaze locking onto mine. "You think this is over?" my mother whispered. Her voice carried a chilling, hollow tone that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You think a few pictures and a recording will save you from me?" Patricia did not back down. The perfectly curated Georgia socialite vanished. The polished woman who hosted charity galas and obsessed over table settings was gone. In her place stood a frantic, cornered predator. She kicked the fallen wooden chair out of her path. The heavy legs scraped harshly against the floorboards. She marched until she stood mere inches from my face. Her expensive floral perfume could no longer mask the sour scent of her nervous sweat. "You will not get away with this," Patricia hissed. Her voice abandoned its usual sweet cadence, dropping into a guttural, frantic register. "I will drive to the police station right now. I will walk up to the front desk and swear under oath that you orchestrated this entire scheme. I will tell the detectives you forged your grandfather's documents. I will testify that you spent the last 12 years funneling our hard-earned capital into your own secret accounts." She was grasping at thin air. She truly believed her ability to lie would outweigh physical evidence. For decades, Patricia controlled the narrative of our family. If a relative asked why I did not attend a holiday dinner, she spun a tale about my selfishness. If a neighbor asked about my career, she subtly undermined my achievements to elevate Jessica. She spent her life rewriting reality to suit her preferences. She thought she could do the same in a federal courtroom. "You cannot rewrite a tape recording," I reminded her. I kept my posture rigid, refusing to step away from her advancing figure. "You cannot forge my grandfather's handwriting and expect a forensic document examiner to miss the discrepancies. The evidence is out of your hands." "Then I will tell them you manipulated the audio," Patricia countered, her eyes wild with desperation. "I will hire experts to claim you used artificial intelligence to fabricate our voices. You are my daughter. You share my DNA. Blood is thicker than water, Olivia." "A daughter who sends her own mother to a prison cell is a monster. Society will crucify you. The press will drag your name through the mud. You will be known as the greedy child who destroyed her family for a payday." I looked at her twisted features. The guilt trip was her oldest, most reliable weapon. Whenever I established a boundary in my 20s, she deployed the concept of family loyalty to tear it down. She weaponized the idea of blood to excuse every insult, every stolen dollar, and every cruel remark. She expected me to fold. She expected the heavy weight of the word monster to break my resolve. I felt my heartbeat slow down. A profound crystal clarity washed over my mind. "Blood means nothing when it is used to drain you dry," I replied. My voice did not rise. It cut through the tense air of the kitchen like a scalpel. "You did not act like a mother when you stole my inheritance. You acted like a parasite. You watched me struggle to buy groceries while you drove luxury cars purchased with my stolen future. You do not get to demand family loyalty when you are standing on my throat." Patricia opened her mouth to scream another threat, but David stepped forward. He moved between us, a tall and unyielding barrier. He looked down at my mother with the cold, analytical detachment of a man examining a ruined spreadsheet. "You need to stop talking, Patricia," David advised. His tone held zero sympathy. "You are operating under the delusion that you still have a choice. The legal machine is already in motion. You cannot talk your way out of a federal inquiry." Richard ran a hand over his face. He looked 10 years older than he did when he walked through my front door. His tailored suit seemed to hang loosely on his shoulders. "What did you do, David?" my father asked, his voice trembling. "Tell me exactly what you sent to the prosecutor." "I sent them the blueprint of your downfall," David answered, turning his attention to Richard. "You run a private investment firm. You know how the Department of Justice handles high-value corporate fraud. The prosecutor I contacted specializes in white-collar syndicates. He reviewed the photographs of the forged trust documents. He cross-referenced the state property registry. He saw the multi-million-dollar portfolio sitting under Olivia's social security number." David paused, letting the cold reality settle over my parents. "The Financial Crimes Division of the FBI has already been pinged," David continued, delivering each sentence like a hammer striking an anvil. "By tomorrow morning, federal agents will begin drafting warrants. They will freeze every single bank account tied to your names. They will lock down your investment firm. They will seize the commercial properties. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee without asking a federal judge for permission." My father stared at the floor. The color drained from his cheeks. He built his entire identity around his wealth. He used his bank accounts to bully competitors, silence critics, and control his daughters. Hearing that his empire was about to be locked behind federal red tape broke his spirit. The arrogant corporate shark vanished, leaving behind a terrified old man. "You will be indicted," David explained, driving the final nail into their coffin. "The federal government does not offer quiet settlements for identity theft of this magnitude. They will pull your country club records. They will audit your luxury purchases. When the local news stations get hold of the indictment, your faces will be plastered across every television screen in Atlanta. Your business partners will cut ties. Your wealthy friends will pretend they never knew you." The psychological warfare shifted. Patricia and Richard no longer viewed me as a rebellious child. They finally saw the sheer scale of the destruction heading toward their doorstep. They realized their money could not shield them from the FBI. They realized their prestigious social standing was about to become the punchline of a regional scandal. The threat of public humiliation terrified them far more than the prospect of a jail cell. "You ruined us," Richard whispered. He grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter for support. His legs seemed to lose their strength. "We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose everything." "You ruined yourselves," I corrected him. "You built a house out of stolen materials. Do not act surprised when the foundation collapses." The silence returned. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like a countdown to their impending arrests. My apartment, which they mocked just an hour ago, was now the site of their ultimate defeat. Patricia looked at her husband. She waited for him to formulate a plan. She expected him to pull a hidden lever, make a phone call, and fix the disaster. But Richard just kept staring at the floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. He had nothing left to offer. The realization struck my mother with brutal force. Her threats failed, her attorney abandoned them, her husband was paralyzed by fear, her wealth was hours away from being frozen by the government. She possessed zero leverage. The terrifying truth crashed down upon her shoulders, crushing her pristine armor into dust. Patricia's knees buckled. She did not fall gracefully. She collapsed onto the scuffed hardwood floor of my kitchen. Her designer handbag spilled open, scattering lipstick tubes and mints across the wood. The woman who spent my entire life looking down her nose at everyone else was now kneeling at my feet. The venom evaporated from her eyes. The malicious glare was replaced by a flood of hot, desperate tears. Her chest heaved with violent sobs. It was a jarring, grotesque display of raw panic. "Olivia, please," Patricia cried, her voice cracking. She reached out her trembling fingers, wrapping around the hem of my cardigan sweater. "Please do not do this to us." "I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything. I was foolish. I was greedy. Please call the prosecutor. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave us permission to use the trust." I looked down at the woman weeping on my floor. She was begging for mercy. She was offering the apologies I craved during my entire childhood. But the tears did not stem from genuine remorse. She was not crying because she hurt me. She was crying because she got caught. "We will give you the money," Patricia babbled, her tears ruining her expensive makeup. "We will transfer the deeds to you tomorrow. You can have the retail properties. You can have the apartment buildings. We will sign whatever you want. Just please call David's contact and stop the warrants. I cannot go to prison, Olivia. I cannot wear those clothes. I cannot survive in a place like that." She tightened her grip on my sweater, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "You are my daughter," she pleaded, her voice echoing in the small room. "You are a good person. Please, save family." I looked down at the woman weeping on my hardwood floor. Patricia kept her manicured hands clamped around the hem of my cardigan, anchoring herself to my ankles. Her expensive pearl necklace hung sideways across her collarbone. The flawless Georgia socialite was entirely broken, reduced to a trembling mess of smeared mascara and desperate bargains. She expected me to bend. She expected the sight of a mother crying to trigger a lifetime of conditioned obedience. I searched my own chest for a shred of pity. I waited for the familiar sting of guilt that usually accompanied any argument with my parents. I felt nothing. My heart remained perfectly steady. The emotional manipulation tactics that ruled my childhood held zero power in this kitchen. I did not see a mother begging for her family. I saw a thief begging to keep her stolen loot. I took a deliberate step backward. The fabric of my sweater slipped from her grasp. Patricia fell forward slightly, her palms slapping against the scuffed wood. "Save your tears for the judge, Mom," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and devoid of any affection. "They might help reduce your sentence. They will not work on me anymore." Patricia let out a ragged gasp. She looked up, her eyes wide with genuine shock. For the first time in 31 years, she realized her daughter was immune to her poison. The realization paralyzed her. She knelt on the floor, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Richard finally snapped out of his terrified trance. The sight of his wife kneeling in a cheap apartment shattered his fragile ego. His shame rapidly transformed into a violent, defensive fury. His face turned a deep mottled shade of crimson. He marched across the kitchen, bending down to grab Patricia by the upper arm. "Get up," Richard growled through clenched teeth. He yanked her upward with brutal force. Patricia stumbled her expensive heels, slipping against the floorboards before she managed to find her balance. She leaned against his shoulder, sobbing softly into the fabric of his tailored suit. My father wrapped his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. He turned his burning gaze toward me. The mask of the sophisticated corporate investor was entirely gone. He looked like a cornered beast ready to lash out. "You are making the biggest mistake of your pathetic life," Richard snarled, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are ungrateful, you are vicious, we gave you everything, and this is how you repay our generosity? As of this exact second, you are no longer a part of this family. Do not call us, do not show up at the estate. You are dead to us, Olivia." He delivered the ultimate punishment. He issued the banishment I spent my entire youth terrified of receiving. He expected me to crumble. He expected me to fall to my knees and apologize. I met his furious stare without flinching. "I was never alive to you," I replied, enunciating every syllable with freezing precision. "I was never a daughter. I was just a tax shelter, and you cannot fire a tax shelter when the audit is already underway." Richard flinched, as if I had struck him across the jaw. He had no counter-argument. The truth stripped away his remaining dignity. "You have exactly 60 seconds to walk out my front door," I announced, pointing toward the hallway. "If you are still standing inside my apartment when the minute ends, I will dial 911. I will tell the dispatcher 2 hostile intruders are refusing to leave my property. I will have you both arrested for criminal trespassing tonight." David stepped up beside me, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. He held his thumb hovering over the keypad, ready to dial the emergency number. "We are at 15 seconds, David stated, his voice echoing in the tense room. Richard knew we were not bluffing. He tightened his grip on Patricia. "Come on," he muttered, dragging her toward the entryway. "We are leaving." They stumbled down the short hallway. Patricia kept her face buried in her hands, weeping loudly. Richard kicked her designer handbag across the threshold, refusing to bend down and retrieve the spilled contents. They crossed the doorframe. My father cast one final venomous glare in my direction. He wanted to offer a parting threat, but the timer was running out. He turned his back and pulled my mother into the communal corridor. I stepped forward and grabbed the heavy brass door handle. I slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the apartment like a thunderclap. I reached up and turned the deadbolt. The heavy metal lock clicked into place with a satisfying, permanent thud. I leaned my forehead against the cool painted wood. The adrenaline that fueled me through the confrontation slowly drained away. I closed my eyes. For the first time in the entire story of my life, the space around me felt clean. The suffocating perfume was gone. The condescending sneers were gone. My apartment was quiet. David walked up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pulling my back flush against his chest. He buried his face in my hair, letting out a long, heavy sigh. We stood there in the silence, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic from the Atlanta streets below. "It is over," David whispered. "You did it. You beat them." I turned around in his arms. I looked at the man who stood by my side while my family tried to destroy his career. He sacrificed his professional standing to help me uncover a decade of financial abuse. I wrapped my arms around his waist and squeezed tight. The overwhelming weight of my toxic childhood finally lifted from my shoulders. I felt lighter. I felt capable of breathing real air. But the victory in my kitchen was only the first step. Forcing them out of my home secured my emotional freedom. Now I needed to secure my legal justice. The narrative did not end with a locked door. The audience requires a payoff. The predators needed to face the full, devastating consequences of their greed. The next morning arrived with a bright, relentless sun shining through my bedroom window. I did not go to my corporate job. David did not log into his suspended work accounts. We drank our coffee in a calm, focused silence. We showered, dressed in our best professional attire, and drove downtown. The federal courthouse loomed above the city streets, a massive structure of white marble and tinted glass. The building intimidated most people, but today it looked like a sanctuary. We walked through the heavy security checkpoints, presenting our identification to the armed guards. We rode the elevator to the 14th floor, stepping into the hushed, sterile corridors of the Department of Justice. A receptionist directed us to a corner office. The brass nameplate on the door read, "Assistant United States Attorney." We knocked once and entered. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Agent Miller, stood up from behind a large mahogany desk. He shook David's hand with genuine respect, acknowledging their shared history in the financial compliance sector. Then he turned to me. "Ms. Smith," Agent Miller said, motioning for us to sit in the leather chairs opposite his desk. "David sent me the encrypted files yesterday afternoon. I spent my Sunday reviewing the property deeds and the tax history associated with your Social Security number. The sheer volume of the holding company is substantial." I sat down, placing my handbag on my lap. I reached inside and pulled out the plain brown manila envelope. I slid it across the polished wood of his desk. "Those are high-resolution photographs of the original trust document," I explained, keeping my voice steady and professional. "You will find the wet ink forgery of my signature on the final page. My parents hid the physical binder in a cardboard box under a guest bed at their primary residence." Agent Miller opened the envelope. He spread the glossy prints across his blotter, examining the forged signature and the notary stamps. His eyes narrowed as he traced the money trail. "This establishes the initial theft," he murmured, nodding slowly. "This proves they hijacked an existing inheritance to fund the shell corporation. It elevates the case from standard tax evasion to a sophisticated federal embezzlement scheme." "I have one more piece of evidence," I said, pulling my smartphone from my pocket. "Last night my parents came to my apartment. They attempted to force me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. During that conversation, they admitted to the forgery. They admitted to hiding the money. They also admitted to manufacturing false extortion claims against my fiancé to sabotage his career." I unlocked the screen and played the audio file. The prosecutor sat in total silence, listening to Patricia and Richard confess to their crimes. He heard the arrogance in my father's voice. He heard the sheer malice in my mother's threats. When the recording finished, Agent Miller picked up his desk phone. "This is no longer just a preliminary review," Agent Miller announced, dialing a secure internal extension. "With this audio recording and the photographic proof of the original trust, we have a concrete foundation for immediate action." He spoke briefly into the receiver, ordering his team to begin drafting the emergency financial freezes. He hung up the phone and looked at me. His expression was grim but determined. "We will secure warrants for their bank accounts in the estate by this evening," the prosecutor promised. "The financial teardown begins today." I walked out of the federal building holding David's hand. The bright Atlanta sun warmed my face. The legal machinery was officially running. My parents spent 31 years believing they were untouchable. Now they were about to discover exactly how it felt to lose everything. 2 weeks passed without a single word from my family. The silence felt heavy, but expected. My parents operated on a foundation of denial. They assumed the federal government moved at a sluggish pace. They believed their expensive lawyers would somehow bury the investigation before it ever saw the light of day. Richard and Patricia decided to project strength. They thought acting untouchable would erase the warrants sitting on a prosecutor's desk. They chose to play a dangerous game of pretend. I did not attend their annual spring charity gala. I watched the disaster unfold through a series of viral videos recorded by the very people my mother tried so hard to impress. The country club represented the peak of Atlanta high society. Richard paid $50,000 a year just to walk through the front doors. Patricia spent months organizing this specific event. She invited local politicians, rival real estate developers, and the wives of senior banking executives. She wanted to prove the Smith family remained a pillar of the elite community. Based on the footage playing across my laptop screen, the evening began with typical arrogance. Waiters circulated holding silver trays of champagne. A string quartet played a soft melody near the manicured gardens. Patricia stood on a raised wooden stage erected on the main lawn. She wore a custom silk gown that cost more than my annual rent. She held a microphone delivering a practice speech about philanthropy and community values. She smiled for the cameras. She looked like a queen ruling over a pristine kingdom, unaware of the storm gathering right outside the gates. Then the flashing blue lights arrived. The authorities did not use the discreet service entrance. 4 dark sport utility vehicles drove straight up the main brick driveway, parking directly in front of the valet stand. The doors swung open. A dozen agents wearing dark windbreakers with federal insignias stepped onto the grass. They did not wait for the speech to conclude. They marched right through the crowd of wealthy donors, ignoring the gasps and murmurs of the elite attendees. The string quartet stopped playing. The guests parted like a receding tide, their faces etched with confusion. Agent Miller led the group. He walked up the steps of the wooden stage. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a stack of folded papers. Patricia froze. Her microphone picked up the sharp intake of her breath, broadcasting her sudden terror to 200 guests. The audio on the video clip was crystal clear. Agent Miller instructed her to place her hands behind her back. He read the charges aloud for everyone to hear. Wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit extortion. Every single word echoed across the quiet lawn, shattering the carefully constructed illusion of my parents' lives. Richard tried to intervene. He pushed through the crowd, demanding the officers lower their voices and show him some respect. 2 agents intercepted him immediately. They spun him around, forcing his arms behind his back, and clicked steel handcuffs around his wrists. The elite members of Atlanta society did not look away out of courtesy. They pulled out their smartphones. The flashbulbs illuminated my parents' sudden downfall. Patricia dropped her microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud squeal of audio feedback. She started shrieking as a female officer guided her down the steps. She did not yell about her innocence. She did not ask for a lawyer right away. She screamed that the agent was wrinkling her silk sleeve. She complained that the steel cuffs were pinching her delicate wrists. She demanded they let her walk to the car without being touched. Her superficial priorities remained intact, even as her freedom evaporated. The agents pushed Richard into the back of the first vehicle. He kept his head down, trying to hide his face from the dozen cameras recording his ruin. Patricia fought the officers, her carefully styled hair falling into her eyes. The heavy doors slammed shut. The vehicles drove away, leaving a stunned crowd standing on the pristine grass. The empire crumbled in less than 5 minutes. By the next morning, the local news stations ran the footage on a continuous loop. I sat on my faded sofa, holding a warm mug of coffee, watching the morning broadcast. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the television screen read, "Prominent couple indicted for stealing daughter's trust fund." The news anchor detailed the federal raid. The broadcast displayed aerial shots of my parents' sprawling estate, noting that authorities executed search warrants at dawn. The reporters stood outside Richard's private equity firm, explaining how the government seized boxes of financial records. The public humiliation was thorough, inescapable, and broadcast to every home in the state. The financial collapse followed within hours. When the Department of Justice files a formal indictment for severe white-collar crimes, they freeze everything connected to the suspects. My parents tried to post bail using their primary checking accounts. The transactions declined. The government locked their cash, their investment portfolios, and their offshore shell companies. The commercial real estate holdings were placed in receivership. Richard's partners at the private equity firm convened an emergency board meeting before lunch. They voted to remove him as managing director. They issued a press release severing all ties to protect their own reputations. They erased his name from the company website. The social exile hit my mother even harder than the financial freeze. Patricia spent her entire adult life cultivating relationships with wealthy elites. She believed those connections made her powerful. But high society operates on ruthless self-preservation. When the news broke, her friends vanished. The country club revoked their membership by noon, citing a morals clause in the contract. The charity boards demanded her immediate resignation. No one answered her phone calls. The people who kissed her cheek the previous week now treated her name like a contagious disease. Because their accounts were frozen, the automatic payments for their sprawling estate stopped clearing. The bank issued a notice of default within days. The fortress they built using my stolen inheritance was slipping through their fingers. They were trapped in a house they could no longer afford, waiting for a trial they could not afford to fight. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I did not feel a trace of guilt. I did not feel sad. I watched the television screen with a deep, abiding sense of peace. I paid my own rent. I earned my own paycheck. The modest apartment I lived in belonged to me, and no one could take it away. I did not owe them my sympathy. They dug their own graves using my stolen identity. Now they had to lie in them. David walked into the living room, adjusting his tie. He returned to his firm earlier that week. Marcus Sterling welcomed him back with a profound apology and a significant raise. The anonymous extortion claims were tossed out the moment the federal indictments hit the news. David's reputation was spotless, while my father's name became a warning tale. David kissed the top of my head and looked at the news broadcasts playing on the television. "The arraignment is set for next month," he noted, his voice calm and steady. "They will have to enter a formal plea before the judge." I set my coffee mug on the table. The public humiliation stripped away their pride and their social standing. The financial freeze removed their leverage. But the upcoming court date would be the final measure of justice. I survived their cruelty for 3 decades. Now I was ready to watch them face the concrete reality of a federal courtroom where their money and their lies held zero power. 6 grueling months dragged by before the final gavel fell. The federal justice system moves with a slow, grinding precision. I spent that half year attending endless meetings with Agent Miller in downtown Atlanta. I reviewed hundreds of financial ledgers. I provided sworn depositions regarding the forged signatures. My parents fought the charges during the early stages. They hired a team of expensive defense attorneys. They tried to suppress the audio recording I captured in my kitchen. They filed motions claiming I obtained the confession under duress. The presiding judge rejected every single motion. The physical photographs of my late grandfather's wet ink trust documents left zero room for interpretation. The paper trail David uncovered formed a concrete wall around their lies. Facing decades behind bars in a brutal public trial, Richard and Patricia finally surrendered. They signed a plea agreement. The prosecutors offered no leniency. The deal simply spared the court the time and expense of a drawn-out spectacle. The sentencing hearing took place on a rainy Tuesday morning. The federal courthouse offered no warmth. The room featured solid oak benches, pale walls, and harsh fluorescent lighting. I sat in the second row of the public gallery. David sat close beside me, his shoulder pressing reassuringly against mine. We did not speak. The heavy silence in the room demanded respect. A thick metal door opened near the front of the chamber. A uniformed bailiff led the defendants into the room. The breath caught in my throat. I had not seen my parents since the night I forced them out of my apartment. The physical transformation stunned me. The federal system stripped away their elite armor. They did not wear tailored charcoal suits or expensive silk dresses. They wore standard-issue tan prison jumpsuits. Richard shuffled toward the defense table, his shoulders slumped forward. The arrogant corporate shark who used his wealth to bully local businesses looked frail. The harsh lighting exposed deep, dark circles under his eyes. He lost weight. His skin carried a pale, sickly tone. Patricia walked behind him. She kept her head down. Her wrists were shackled together at her waist. The steel chains clinked softly with every step she took. Her dyed blonde hair showed a stark, jagged strip of gray at the roots. She wore no makeup. The pristine Georgia socialite who obsessed over country club galas was gone, replaced by a terrified inmate. Jessica sat at the far end of the defense table. She wore a simple black dress. No handcuffs bound her wrists. When the federal agents raided the estate months ago, my sister panicked. She remembered the harsh reality David laid out in my living room. She knew Patricia planned to use her as a human shield. Jessica immediately hired a public defender and requested a private meeting with the prosecution. She handed over every email Patricia sent her regarding the shell companies. She testified about the fake notary stamps. By turning state's evidence against our parents, Jessica saved herself from a cell. The judge entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. He took his seat at the elevated bench, opening a thick folder containing 12 years of stolen history. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the people who ruined my youth. The judge did not mince words. He spoke with a stern, unforgiving authority. He called their actions a calculated, sustained betrayal of familial trust. He noted that Richard used his specialized financial expertise to prey upon his own daughter. He admonished them for exploiting a legal system designed to protect citizens, twisting it into a shield for their greed. Richard stood before the bench to receive his penalty. The judge sentenced my father to 36 months in a federal penitentiary. 3 years. 3 years of waking up on a thin mattress. 3 years of eating cafeteria food. 3 years stripped of his golf courses, his tailored suits, and his commanding authority. Richard closed his eyes. His jaw trembled. He absorbed the crushing reality of his new life in silence. The judge turned his attention to Patricia. He referenced the audio recording where she admitted to hijacking the inheritance. He called her greed breathtaking and her lack of maternal instinct deeply disturbing. He sentenced my mother to 24 months of federal incarceration. Patricia swayed on her feet. She leaned against the wooden table to keep from collapsing. But the judge was not finished. The criminal penalties only satisfied the government. He addressed the civil damages next. He looked directly at me in the gallery, offering a brief nod of respect before issuing a binding restitution order. The court mandated the immediate liquidation of the entire Georgia commercial real estate portfolio. Every retail strip mall, every warehouse, and every luxury apartment building purchased with my stolen identity would be sold at public auction. The proceeds would not go to the state. The judge ordered the funds used to repay my grandfather's original trust fund. The math delivered the final blow. The court demanded the return of the initial principal sum, plus 12 years of accrued interest, plus heavy punitive damages for the emotional distress they inflicted. The government was forcing them to hand me the keys to the empire they built on my back. My parents tried to starve me out by freezing my checking account. Now the law required them to secure my financial independence for the rest of my life. Jessica received her ruling last. Because of her extensive cooperation with the district attorney, she avoided jail time. The judge sentenced her to 3 years of supervised probation and hundreds of hours of community service. She cried quietly, staring down at her folded hands. She kept her freedom, but she lost her safety net. Her luxury loft and imported car were gone, seized along with the rest of the estate. She would have to learn how to survive in the real world, just like I did. The bailiff approached the table to escort the prisoners back to the holding cells. The heavy steel chains rattled as Patricia stood up. Before turning toward the exit door, my mother twisted her body around. She searched the crowded gallery until her eyes locked onto mine. Her expression begged for a lifeline. She wanted a tear. She wanted a nod of forgiveness. She searched my face for proof that the bond of blood survived the wreckage she caused. She needed to know I still cared. I sat perfectly still on the hard oak bench. I felt David lace his fingers through mine. His grip was warm, solid, and real. I did not offer my mother a smile. I did not offer her a frown of pity. I looked at the broken woman in the tan jumpsuit and I felt nothing at all. I simply turned my head away, shifting my gaze toward the heavy wooden exit doors at the back of the room. I severed the final invisible string connecting us. The judge struck his sounding block with a sharp wooden gavel. The sharp crack echoed through the chamber, signaling the official end of the war. David and I stood up and walked down the center aisle. We pushed through the heavy doors and stepped into the bustling Atlanta street. The rain stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflecting the city lights. The restitution meant I was no longer a struggling corporate employee skipping meals to pay rent. The funds returning to my name secured my future, protecting the family David and I were about to build. My grandfather's dying wish was finally honored. The toxic root that choked my potential for 3 decades was pulled from the earth. Justice was delivered cold and concrete, and I walked away free. 1 year passed since the heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom swung shut behind my parents. 365 days of waking up without a knot of dread in my stomach. The air in Georgia felt different now. It no longer carried the suffocating weight of my mother's expectations or my father's quiet demands. Today was my wedding day. I stood on the balcony of a beautiful beach house located on the quiet shores of Jekyll Island. The morning sun painted the ocean in brilliant shades of gold and pale blue. The salty breeze brushed against my face. I held a cup of coffee, enjoying the profound, unbroken silence. A year ago, I lived in a cramped apartment, rationing my groceries and fighting a manufactured banking freeze. Today, I stood on the deck of a property I rented for the entire weekend, paid for in full. The federal government moved swiftly after the sentencing hearing. The courts seized the commercial real estate portfolio my parents built using my stolen identity. They auctioned the retail centers and the luxury apartment buildings. The proceeds flowed directly back into my grandfather's trust fund, fulfilling his dying wish with 12 years of accrued interest. I never returned to my exhausting corporate job. I took control of my own finances, ensuring my future and David's future remained secure forever. The sliding glass door behind me opened. Susan, David's mother, stepped onto the balcony holding a garment bag. She smiled, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. She did not criticize my posture. She did not demand I change my makeup. She simply pulled me into a gentle hug and told me I looked radiant. Susan stepped into the void Patricia left behind, proving that family is defined by actions, not genetics. An hour later, I walked down to the beach. We kept the guest list small. We only invited the people who stood by us when the storm raged. We did not invite distant relatives who gossiped about the scandal. We did not invite Jessica. My sister remained in Atlanta serving her 3 years of supervised probation. Without my parents' stolen wealth to fund her luxury loft, Jessica was forced to find a minimum wage job. She spent her days folding clothes at a retail store, dealing with the same demanding customers she used to mock. She learned the harsh reality of earning her own living. I stepped onto the warm white sand. The string quartet began to play a soft acoustic melody. I did not have a father waiting to link arms with me. I did not have a patriarch to give me away. I walked down the aisle entirely alone, and it was the most empowering moment of my life. I carried my own weight. I fought my own battles. I secured my own freedom. I looked at David standing beneath a simple wooden arch draped in white fabric. He wore a sharp linen suit, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He risked his entire professional reputation to help me uncover the rot hidden beneath my family tree. He proved his loyalty when I had nothing but $40 and a locked checking account. As I took his hand, my thoughts drifted briefly to the people missing from the crowd. Right at this exact moment, Richard was waking up in a low-security federal facility. He was no longer the arrogant managing director of an investment firm. He was an inmate assigned to the laundry detail, forced to fold rough canvas uniforms for his fellow prisoners. His tailored suits were gone. His power vanished. Patricia was sitting in a women's correctional facility 2 states away. She wore standard-issue clothing. She ate standard-issue food. The woman who panicked over a wrinkled silk dress at her country club now shared a tiny concrete room with a stranger. Her elite friends never visited her. Her country club rivals forgot her name. The social exile she feared most became her permanent reality. I pushed their memories away. They did not deserve my attention on this day. David and I exchanged our vows over the sound of the crashing waves. We promised to protect each other, to build a foundation on honesty, and to never let secrets fester in our home. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. The small crowd erupted into cheers. We kissed the taste of salt and joy lingering on our lips. The reception took place on a wide wooden deck overlooking the water. We did not host a rigid formal dinner with stiff seating arrangements. We set up long tables adorned with simple coastal flowers. The guests laughed, shared stories, and passed plates of roasted seafood. The atmosphere felt light, unburdened by the toxic whispering that poisoned my engagement party. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant streaks of orange and purple, a familiar face stood up from the head table. Marcus Sterling, the senior managing partner at the accounting firm, tapped a silver spoon against his champagne glass. The murmurs quieted down. Marcus smoothed his tie and looked directly at David. A year ago, our firm faced a severe test of integrity. Marcus began, his voice carrying easily over the ocean breeze. A wealthy man tried to use his influence to destroy the career of an honest investigator. It is easy to back down when you are threatened by powerful people. It is easy to sign away your rights to keep the peace. But David and Olivia chose to fight. They chose the truth. Marcus raised his glass higher. Because of David's unyielding dedication to uncovering financial fraud, I am proud to announce that he will not just be returning to the office. He is officially stepping up as the new director of forensic compliance. The guests clapped loudly. David squeezed my hand under the table, his cheeks flushed with pride. My father tried to banish David from the financial sector. Instead, Richard's failed extortion plot served as the catalyst for David's greatest professional triumph. The firm rewarded his courage with a substantial promotion. The bad actors lost their empire and the good men inherited the earth. Later that evening, the band started playing a slow, familiar song. David led me onto the makeshift dance floor under a canopy of glowing string lights. The ocean churned softly in the background. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat. I looked around the deck. I saw Susan laughing with her husband. I saw Marcus sharing a drink with his colleagues. I saw a circle of warmth, trust, and genuine affection. I reflected on the harrowing journey that brought me to this beach. My mother grabbed Jessica's arm at a fancy restaurant and ordered her to steal my phone. Patricia thought she was staying one step ahead of a secret. She thought she could silence me by locking my bank account and framing the man I loved. She believed her money made her invincible. They tried to destroy my future in order to bury their past. They tried to burn down my life to keep themselves warm. But every vicious trap they set only pushed me closer to my own liberation. If Patricia never stole that phone, I might never have checked the deleted email folder. If Richard never forged that prenuptial agreement, I might never have captured the audio recording required to secure a federal indictment. Their arrogance handed me the exact tools I needed to dismantle their fortress. They thought they were trapping a naive girl. They did not realize they were handing a grown woman the keys to her own freedom. The music swelled. David spun me around, a bright, unburdened smile lighting up his face. I smiled back, feeling a profound sense of closure settle deep into my bones. My grandfather's stolen trust fund was safely returned to my name. The abusers who drained my energy for 3 decades were locked behind iron bars, paying their debt to society. The toxic roots of my family tree were severed, leaving me free to plant something new, healthy and strong. I raised my glass of sparkling cider, offering a silent toast to the quiet Georgia night. The truth did not just find its way home. It swept away the wreckage, poured a new foundation, and rebuilt my home from the ground up. I took a sip of my drink, savoring the sweet taste of victory. I was secure. I was deeply loved, and for the first time in my entire life, I was entirely free.